Welcome to Judaism Demystified, a podcast for the perplexed. Join us as we explore some of the most fascinating Jewish and Torah-related topics with our esteemed guests. By tackling some of the biggest questions you likely won't find addressed elsewhere, we aim to shed light on important issues and inspire a return to the fundamentals. Enjoy the show. Thank you for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. We are honored to have Ami Kozak, comedian and host of the Ami's House podcast. Am I correct?
Correct.
So that is a really, really funny and enlightening podcast. And you are a personal hero of ours because of your nuanced, thoughtful, courageous takes, and also just being somebody who stands up for our people in such a pleasant and elegant way, and it's really just an honor to have you on.
Oh, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I look forward to demystifying.
All right, off to a good start.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've watched a bunch of your episodes, and you know, we see you often on all these different channels like Candace Owens and other celebrity kind of podcasts.
Channels.
We never really get a chance to hear about Ami Kozak, like what drew you to comedy initially, and how did you decide to pursue this career in comedy?
So it goes back to the roots of my creative endeavors were actually music. I'm a musician, professional musician. I've been doing music for 15 plus years. I've been saying 15 plus years for a while, so it's probably longer than that, but maybe I'm just forgetting my age. But anyway, I'm a professional musician. I studied music at the Berklee College of Music. I have a band called Distant Cousins, and we've done a lot of original music, albums, music for film and television. I've composed for television shows, commercials. My band has done work for DreamWorks and Netflix, and we've had a lot of songs and television shows. And we recently actually are doing our first hybrid Hebrew-English album. The two other members are pretty big names in the Jewish world, Dov Rosenblatt and David Swirsky. Dov used to be in a band called Blue Fringe. David is in a band called Moshav. And the three of us started a band in LA when I moved there back in 2011. So for the past many, many years, I've been very active on the music scene. And recently, there was sort of the neglected child of mine, which was comedy. Comedy was always this thing I did socially. It was a part of my personality. But it wasn't really anything I was doing professionally for a long time, mainly because there wasn't really an outlet for it. You know, in the entertainment business, a lot of these things are sort of siloed off. There are different lanes you can pursue, but they don't really overlap, you know. So I was really head on in the music business and doing music professionally, doing it full time. Comedy was always something I had as part of my identity. But it wasn't until I started taking to social media, mainly TikTok, and then eventually YouTube and Instagram. But back when TikTok was sort of fairly new, I sort of took the opportunity to approach it slightly differently than I had used social media before. Previously, I mainly used it as a promotional tool for the music, for the band, to try to announce when shows were happening or things like that. But all the creative stuff I was doing was outside of social media. So I decided to look into social media more as a creative tool than a promotional tool. And the easiest thing I could do after experimenting with a little and doing some musical stuff, I started doing impressions on a daily basis and showcasing that skill I'd always had, but never had a public outlet for. And once I started doing that consistently, eventually several impressions popped off and people got to see that whole other side of me. And that child that I had neglected, which was comedy, started to get attention and built up a nice organic audience, especially during COVID when a lot of stuff on the music side, sort of on the live performance side, shut down. Things were all recalibrating, built up in a really a nice organic following on TikTok, which eventually translated over to YouTube and Instagram till this day. So once COVID ended and I was in LA for a little while longer, I started doing more stand-up and then moved to New York and dove headfirst into the stand-up scene there. And then, of course, with the Jewish community, there's only a few people out there who can do real Jewish, authentic Jewish comedy. And that's when I started to take advantage of my intimate, close connection to the Jewish community and knowing that world intimately as a modern Orthodox Jew. Started the J Sketch Comedy Trio, and then post October 7th, everything kind of leaned in full on onto the Jewish stuff. And that identity really took a front and center approach where the advocacy and speaking out about these issues with regard to Israel came in. But that was more of a recent thing. But
Yeah.
in any event, that's sort of how it all came to be. And the podcast along the way was a nice extension of allowing me to explore the different elements of everything that I'm doing. But that's the long or short story of my creative journey thus
So
far.
is music still like 1A, or has it moved kind of behind? Because I think most people now know you for your comedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's not moved. It's just it's moved. It's made room, you know.
Mm.
And I think publicly, yeah, because of the power of social media, you know, uh, it's interesting. Social media with comedy was a little bit easier to do and complementary because the video that I post is the final product of what I'm trying to do. With music, often you're making records and you're performing and you're writing, and then you have to figure out how to social mediaize it into a video creation thing. With comedy, those things are sort of one and the same. So it was always a little bit easier. One, it's like a solo thing that I'm just doing when I want to do it, but also the what I'm doing in a if I'm putting together some kind of thing like a video, the impression, that is the social media post. Whereas a song, performance, you know, that exists outside of the video recording of it. So I think a
Right.
lot of bands struggle with social media for that reason, because a lot of the creative energy is put into writing, recording, performing, really working on the craft. But video content creation is a whole other thing. So learning that craft is necessary, I think, to succeed on social media. So always working at that and posting about it. And I think there's some nice overlap as people are discovering, because it's funny. I mean, I've been doing music a lot longer, but yeah, as you said, the attention that's garnered a lot more recently is the shtick, which is great. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Who would you say are your influences comedically?
I really like, I mean, I identify with the polymath type comedians, um, guys who like are multiple sort of multi-purpose in terms of their skill sets. You know, um, even if their comedy itself isn't necessarily my style, but like a Bo Burnham or a Reggie Watts or even Jamie
Wow.
Foxx. Jamie Foxx does impressions. He sings. He acts. He's an actor.
And with Bo Burnham, yeah.
Yeah, he can do anything in that way really well. And I feel like in that sense, when I see Jamie Foxx able to do all that kind of stuff rather seamlessly, it's pretty inspiring to me. Stand up wise, I mean, I love everyone from the Bill Burr, Louis C.K., Patrice O'Neill, and
Mm.
even the cleaner comics like Gaffigan. Say Seinfeld I really enjoy most as a commentator of comedy. I really love his takes on things. So I love what he has to say about comedy. Trying to think of who else. I always feel like that question's hard, but comedically, yeah, I mean, the whole range of different stand-ups. The roast comics, Andrew Schultz, Tony Hinchcliffe.
So I'm,
Um,
I'm sure you're into like that. I actually recently saw Shane Gillis. I saw Louis C.K. at MSG last year. I saw Bill Burr in Forest
sure.
Hills. So that was
Yes,
just a bucket list.
I like performance. I like guys who are pretty, like, animated. Sebastian Maniscalco is a really,
Yeah.
I really love Sebastian. I love a lot of that stuff. So I'd say the stuff that isn't my style, I appreciate the writing of it, but like generally the more deadpan, sort of Nate Bargatze, those kind of stuff. The writing is great. Stylistically, it's not my thing, but I can appreciate it. But the
Totally.
more mellow stuff, I like the bigger bombastic stuff more generally, or like the real cutting or
Right.
crass or
Yeah.
but I saw Jim Gaffigan live more recently, and it was just incredible. So when you see guys really who are just like alpha at their best peak at the top of the game, it's really cool to watch. I love
My
Mark Norman is another one. Mark
Oh,
Norman's
he's
amazing.
great. Comedy. Yeah, he's one of those.
Hey, comedy. Oh, yeah, mystified. Gotta get misty eyed. Ooh, getting gross. Oh, okay, comedy. Yeah,
One of my favorite Jewish comedians is Gary Gulman. He's like a
sure.
wordsmith. He's fantastic,
Yeah.
and I think like among the Orthodox, I think it's just like basically you and Elon Gold. Am I missing anybody really in in that world.
You got Modi, you got up and
Quality.
comers, you got Ellie Leibovitz, who's a colleague
He
and
does your
contemporary.
skits. He does the
Yeah,
skit.
skits with me. Dovey Newberger's up and coming. You'll be seeing more of him.
He was on Mislabeled for a while. That guy.
He was on Miss Label, yeah. Are you guys okay with Miss Label impressions, or is that gonna get you in trouble? Because
Yeah,
you're kind
we're gonna get to the impressions at the end. So he's
of,
on the
yeah, Dovey and Mikey and all the guys in sort of there's a cool scene. There's like I think people are really unapologetically Jewish now, and it's not uncool anymore. And I'm glad to see that. I don't think
yeah.
it's hierarchical to be who you are. It used to be, especially for Jews. We're such a people
Yes,
like that.
yes.
We always want to be like. We don't want to be too Jewish for the masses, so that we want them to like us. And I really, in a post October 7th world, it's like we have to stop doing that.
And
Like, who
there
cares?
there's some. First of all, obviously you mentioned Seinfeld. He's just stepped it up like in a huge way. But people like John Lovitz
Hmm.
have been so outspoken about Israel and his
Yeah,
pride of being Jewish, and it's so inspiring.
yeah.
And that to me is just has been a revelation, and I'm so happy to see that happening. Why do you
But
think
even
there?
like for even the frum Jews, I credit guys like Ben Shapiro who's rocking a kippah the whole time. It's like there's always this notion that like even the most religious Jews, it's best kept secret. By the way, did you know he's Orthodox?
Right.
So I think those days, not judging anyone, but like
Yeah.
I have felt that I know a lot of people feel that like, hey, I'm not gonna violate Shabbos and I'm not gonna go on Shabbos or tour and I'm always gonna keep kosher, but it's just something people know about me privately. And I think certainly post October 7th, there's been a bit of an enthusiasm around just being proudly
Yeah.
Jewish in whatever form that is, and Orthodox especially like which have been because the Orthodox Jew sort of has the most to sort of have to contend with in terms of compromise and things that come at odds with practice that you have to negotiate and whatever. So,
Right.
I grew up in the generation where you didn't wear your yarmulke to work. I mean, everybody knew you didn't come in Fridays. You never compromised anything, but you didn't wear your yarmulke to work. You didn't rub it in people's faces.
Right.
And I find that, today it's sort of like I think stepping out of that a little bit, and I think
Yeah.
that's a positive thing.
And I think it also, I mean, to defend those people, obviously, I think you feel like when you wear a kippah, it comes with a lot of responsibility. And maybe you don't feel like you're on the level, or especially if you have a voice and people listen to you, like you feel like you're being scrutinized. So you have to be even more careful when you're wearing a kippah. So like, if maybe you feel like you're not a Talmid Chacham, you shouldn't be, you know, saying what you want to say, and I don't think that's correct. I actually think what you're saying is absolutely true, and it's one of the positives that has come out of a post October 7th world.
Yeah, and it's a complicated thing because in theory that sounds right, but then what are we really saying? We're saying we're all not just going to act up to this standard, but maybe we should look internally and say maybe as a community we can leave a little room for people of different stripes to still be connected, to still sport a yarmulke if they want to, and maybe that's our own judgment that needs to be tweaked,
Absolutely.
or our own
I like that.
judgmentalism.
Yes,
I like that.
absolutely. Yeah, and obviously, like we know this that there are so many different labels put on Jews today, and among just from ourselves, what we put on other people, which is like, there's the rationalist and the mystic and the chassid, and these are just ridiculous labels. And I'm happy that this is being addressed finally.
Yeah,
Um,
and
I
perhaps it's not the fact of wearing a yarmulke in public and worrying about what might happen is really being worried about the community's judgment upon thee and upon oneself. And maybe the community needs to be a little less judgmental. Not to say we shouldn't have standards, but
yeah,
maybe everyone needs to chill. So that
absolutely.
way more people can wear a yarmulke proudly without fear of misstep, you know?
Well said. And
I'm with you on that.
why do you think there's been a historically disproportionate number of Jewish comedians? And how has your Jewish identity influenced your comedic style and like material?
Hmm. Certainly a history of pain and suffering necessitates coping mechanisms, and humor is a coping mechanism to deal with the tragedies of life. So when you're a historically oppressed people, you develop good mechanisms for lifting each other's spirits through dark times, you know? So that is probably a big factor. Immigrant populations with large families is another one. Italians are probably pretty funny too. Anyone who's got a big family, knows that you got to develop thick skin, and you got to, in order to fend off attacks from siblings and hold your own. And if you have a lot of younger siblings, and the younger and younger down you go, the research shows that like the younger siblings have to be funny to stand out for attention. Older siblings tend to be a little more stoic. Oldest children certainly take on responsibility, but the youngest child is usually the funny one. I'm a youngest child. So I think that's a part of it, having big families. Having communities that are cohesive and close-knit allows for people to be comfortable and people to be sort of open and honest with each other, so that one can be, the whole riffing and roasting and being able to take a joke as a sort of core Jewish characteristic, I think is a product of tight-knit communities that have made it through the ages when a lot of people have sought to do harm to those communities. So art is a lot of times born out of suffering, comedy as well, and learning how to be adaptable. I mean, humor and charm and those skill sets socially that Jews have had to use in order to survive have certainly developed over time, combined with robust education and being informed, which humor requires as well as a certain sort of basic level of intelligence and insight. The combination of scholarship, social adaptability to be able to survive in various environments that were hostile. That's just a hunch as to why we've cultivated such a strong, sharp sense of humor. And then when you're raised in that culture that values that, you tend to lean into the things that your community values. Mm-hmm. So the competition to be funny or to be able to hold your own verbally has probably that's probably one of the contributed factors. These are all just kind of insights. I'm not like basing this on deep scholastic research, but it seems to be the case that, I don't know. I remember, you're growing up, and even from my own story, you got a bunch of grandparents around, and they just basically sit around and schmooze all day. That's like all they do, or they play cards.
Right.
And when you do that, like, what are you doing to keep each other entertained? You're joking around, and they're doing it in Yiddish, and then that translates, and then the sort of admiration for comedy, for skills. I used to have to, I would constantly be summoned to do impressions for my parents' friends and things like that. So that's culturally encouraged too. And then you have the whole, the Jewish sort of impact on building up Hollywood and entertainment and the arts and things like that. So, it's all those things that sort of foster a culture that brews comedy.
So that really brings to mind, one of my favorite movies, which I think every generation can relate to and every culture can relate to, is My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And you can see them as like a Sephardi family, an Italian family, Greek, and like you said, it has a lot to do with being from a culture that has this value of like a family unit. That's such an important part of it, and it's just like the message is universally felt by everybody. So absolutely.
Let me ask you, have you had any challenges being an Orthodox Jew in that comedic culture and world?
In what sense? Like, because things get like dirty or raunchy or stuff like that?
No, more like antisemitism, or just people making like uncomfortable comments to you, or just the fact that you're loud and proud Jew in that world, because there is that fine line between, you have to take a joke, but at the same time sometimes, like, is this personal, is it
Anti-Semitism is not a problem in comedy. That's where everything is okay, because people are joking around and people aren't being serious. So it's when people are being serious that it's a problem. Chappelle's Holocaust jokes, or first couple of jokes in his monologue about Rosh Hashanah, it's Shana Na tomorrow. I wanna take off. Those were funny. Like those Jewish jokes he was making were funny. They were jokes. It's when he got serious about halfway through the monologue that things got very disturbing.
Right.
It's all of a sudden when someone's not joking and they're just making a point and there's no punchline, that you become suspect. Like, what's that supposed to mean?
Well, he's kind of like a philosopher slash social commentator also. It's like his jokes, to me at least, they don't he makes you think. It's like George Carlin kind of. He's when he speaks, he's not just a comedian. So I think sometimes that
Yeah, but even Carlin, even the commentary stuff is revealing kind of truthful elements, but they are, and they're provocative, but like that's different than like just making a serious point. Stom, like just making a serious point. And so you don't see it when you're a comedian and people make Jewish jokes, that even if they're like disparaging or making fun of Jews, they're making fun. That's the point. Like you're trying to make fun of each other and it's, ascribing malicious intention. Malice has to do with intention, not what people are saying, but what their intentions are. If somebody in a club, called me a money grubbing Hebe as a joke, I might laugh because it might be funny. Lisa Nampanelli had a set where she made fun of everybody in the crowd, including the money grubbing Hebes. But it was hilarious because she had this whole like, what's the worst thing I could say about each group kind of thing. And that's a nasty line. And that's what's funny about it, because it's like trying to think of creatively the worst versions of what people could say. But they're not, they don't come from a place of hate or malice. They come from a place of humor. So that's what sometimes makes you go, oh, because you reveal certain truths about the world, but your intentions are to make people laugh about them. But comedy has to have tinges of truth. So stereotype jokes, racist jokes, racial jokes, I should say, not racist jokes, racial jokes, Holocaust jokes, jokes about death, jokes about life, jokes about kids, jokes about the worst elements of our society and the best things. They're all jokes, and that's the point. So I don't experience that from comedians necessarily. Now, in the entertainment business as a whole, one could argue that like on the industry side of things, less so the creative, but post October 7th, it gets more complicated. I have seen, obviously, you have your like pro-Palestinian comedians who are annoying, and who, I've lost some respect for some of the views I've seen people take. But like, not because they've made bad jokes, but because they have bad takes and bad positions outside of their comedy. In the industry as a whole, the general apathy and spinelessness and moral confusion or cowardice of the general apparatus has been really disappointing and kind of pathetic to see. So many people thinking that it's complicated or brave or courageous to speak out against anti-Semitism, as if that takes some sort of bravery, sort of is indicative of like what is wrong with the general like culture and sort of entertainment and outside of it. Like the fact that there are only a few people you can pick out of a handful that are willing to say anything. So that's disappointing, but that's less about like being a comic and being around other comedians. I mean, comedians also want to be able to say what they want. So they value free speech. They value things that really don't fall on the whole woke left
yes.
Agenda. It doesn't comport so well, because the people who I think are the most anti-humor right now in our society politically is probably the woke left. Some on the far right, sure, but the woke left ideas are much more ascendant in the culture. And where is the place where humor goes to die? It's, to me, in wokeness, where speech is violence and violence is resistance. So
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's often viewed as comedy is often viewed as like one of the last bastions of free speech. So you have an important role to play in society. I think comedians today have a very unique role in society, like people like Bill Maher, and others like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Bill Maher's also kind of toes the line between comedian and like a commentator. I mean, I actually like his show. I've been a fan for a long time, watching for many years. His comedy is just like, but I don't. I'll wait till you laugh. I don't know. Like they're just kind of his takes. But I appreciate the format. So yeah, I appreciate that format. It was sort of podcasting before there was podcasting, is what the real time is. It's a little before its time.
Of course.
But I
So,
always appreciated the format.
so your plan, I'm assuming your plan was not initially to get into politics at all, but because of October 7th, that kind of catapulted you into this, this world of let's say going on podcasts like Daily Wire or Candace Owens. Is that something that like you wanted to do early on in your career? Like I want to become kind of like a social commentator, or was it just something that just happened naturally?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, I always had opinions amongst, friends, and I always liked ideas, and I was a hobbyist about economics and politics, but that wasn't what I wanted to do from an entertainment standpoint or to build an audience around. And I find that sometimes, no matter which side of the alley you're on, when you create a whole audience around those ideas, you really become trapped by your confirmation biases and your audience capture very easily, because people want you to retain and hold certain positions, which makes you inflexible to listen or to be open to anything other than the ideas that reinforce your audience. So it's a tricky game. Uh, Today, as I started doing more podcasting and building up that audience, I was able to expand more and talk about more ideas. And it's a little more of a range of things that can go deeper on particular issues. But yeah, I still don't consider myself really political. I don't feel compelled to go on and talk about JD Vance necessarily, or an abortion bill or whatever. That's not really what my public persona aims to do. But after October 7th, it wasn't a political stance. It was a moral stance. It was like you can't exist in a world of entertainment or content creation that doesn't respect basic morality and basic humanity. And if people couldn't see what happened on October 7th clearly as a battle between good and evil, I felt like comedy's days were numbered. And I'm not going to not do comedy, but I felt the need to speak out about it. And obviously it's close to home. So this was my issue, as opposed to other issues that may have been politically charged that weren't close to home. Everyone's entitled to have particular issues that resonate with them in a different way. And I'm sure if I was a Uyghur Muslim, and I would have spoken out about that on my comedy channel earlier or something, just because I would have been closer to that issue. Or if on a whole host of issues, if something hit close to home, maybe I would have drawn that line there. But again, yeah, post October 7th to me just seemed like a real earth-shattering moment of not just the event itself being so horrific, but the world's reaction to it, both in apathy and support, which led me to understand in a very kind of dark way, but crystallizing way, how the Holocaust itself was justified and happened. All you have to do is tweak the language and tweak and confuse people enough to think that evil is good and good is evil and everything was backwards, and convince them that they're doing something virtuous by supporting Hamas and calling it resistance. So it just felt like we all kind of woke up in a world we suspected may have been there, but certainly realized was worse than we thought, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. Certainly the Jews left of center had a massive wake-up call. Those of the right kind of had a told you so moment, but I think it was even worse and more shocking than any of us could have imagined to see people in the streets of New York City or across Europe or the West or our universities praising October 7th and Hamas as a glorious day of resistance, which we saw so explicitly that how could anyone not say anything was something you could not avoid.
The scary part is that there are intelligent people that are taking these lines. You went on with Candace Owens, she's an intelligent person, and it's hard to understand how things got here. You know what I mean? Like it kind of, I guess the keen observer can see the build up to this, but like if you're just looking at it, it just seems like all this just happened. It's weird.
Yeah. I mean, we take for granted how close we are to the issue in a sense, and there's a lot of informed knowledge, and there's a lot of stuff that you've come to understand is propaganda and a perversion of language that, to a complete layperson who's totally ignorant on the region, the history, if you look at it like another Russia, Ukraine, and you think Israel's Russia, or vice versa, when Russia, Ukraine happened, I remember thinking to myself, oh, so everyone's just putting up Ukrainian flags now because it seems very obvious who the good guys and the bad guys are. And I'm not taking a position on this, but I remember seeing that it seemed very clear to me. But I know that there were people who were like, and as time went on, people were like more sympathetic to Russia. And there were people who were like, no, 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 you don't really understand what's going on here. Now, I'm not taking a position because I'm not that informed on the issue or what led up to Russia invading. And it seemed very clear to me that Russia was invading a sovereign country. But I think people were mindlessly throwing up Ukrainian flags in the same way they're mindlessly throwing up Palestinian flags. I'm only equating the fact that people are taking positions publicly
Being
with very
uninformed.
little knowledge of an issue. And Candace is very, very uninformed on the issue, and that was
She's very
made very
passionate
clear.
about it. She's very
What?
passionate. She's very passionate about something she's not informed about.
Well,
That's
no,
That's the
she's very
problem.
she's very passionate about not being pressured into believing something that or agreeing with something that she doesn't know much about. So it's really, and I'm not defending, I'm explaining. It's that if you are in an environment that's telling you that there's a consensus around, I think a lot of her, in her case, there was it's more of an issue of temperament and ignorance. So if she feels a certain pressure and then lacks a certain understanding of the issue, she gets very reactive. And then if she gets attacked for the wrong reaction, gets very defensive, and it sort of spirals and then gets more provocative and
Here's the
then
thing.
doubles down. So I called her out for a very ignorant tweet, and then she invited me on, and then we continued the conversation, which I thought was, at least, the first time we spoke was a pretty constructive one. And most people thought like, oh, they tried to give me the win, like for winning the conversation. But I didn't actually take it that way, because most of the time, to my points in our first conversation, she just said, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. And if you watch the conversations, it oftentimes is very much drawn out that, when I'm engaging with someone like her, we have two ways to approach objectionable speech. We can go into our siloed corners in the Jewish community, write a smear article, pat ourselves on the back and say, ha ha, called her out. Or we can have the intellectual strength and fortitude and confidence to either engage with these people directly, but not be afraid of objectionable speech. It doesn't make it less objectionable, less wrong, but how can we do it? Could we go in our corners, give ourselves high fives, and try to run away or whatever? I mean, there's obviously, I draw the line at certain points, and there's certain people I wouldn't engage with who are just purely malicious and purely hateful. But when we hear objectionable speech, to engage with it, challenge it, is not to condone it. It's the opposite. And I think it's, we have two ways you can go about it. What do you think is going to do more harm or more good? Like, what makes a better case? Did the ideas stand on their own? We shouldn't be afraid. And are we so fragile that if we see something like, even something as like silly as some Holocaust minimization, which is atrocious and terrible to do, but if it comes from a place of ignorance and not hate, maybe it's easier to fix by addressing and engaging it, because hate is harder to fix than ignorance. And I've maintained for a while that a lot of it is rooted in a lack of understanding and lack of awareness, and certainly an insensitivity. But if you scream at that and then write hit pieces and don't agree and don't engage, then you may just make the problem worse, not better. I don't know. I can't say definitively, but we've seen both approaches. So you tell me.
I think the flip side of the whole woke culture is kind of this red pill culture on the right, which
Right.
is like where I feel like, especially after, COVID, there's this feeling of like, oh, well, one conspiracy turned out to be maybe true. So now
Yeah.
that leads you into kind of believing in every single conspiracy. That's why you start hearing innuendo from people like Candace Owens about like Frankists and Sabbateans, but I'm not talking about Jews, but I am talking about Jews. But I'm not saying Jews, or the Rothschilds, and all these things start, coming out into the open, as if like when have you ever met a Jew who like says I like George Soros, but like that's always used against us as if he's the prototypical Jew. And the issue I had with like having you on is not only do I feel like her audience is kind of dead set on basically conspiratorial thinking, because the comment section just overwhelmingly is anti-Jew, it seems like, at least.
Yeah.
But she would have someone like, well, I had my token Jew on, okay, or some rabbi who's kind of, I'm not going to say names, but the rabbis that she has on are kind of like clown shows. So she has these people like kind of set up to lose in a way or look like fools. And then she has a comedian on and then Norman Finkelstein. So you should bring on like Benny Morris or like Coleman Hughes, I'm obviously you did a great job, but I'm saying at first when I saw it, I was like, why is she bringing Norman Finkelstein and a Jewish comedian and saying this is like equivalent? So to me, it always felt like there was a slant over there that was very, very, there was a lot of innuendo. There's a lot of, conspiratorial kind of messages, but she gaslights in a way where, if you even question her, she has this attack like, you see, Jews are so sensitive. Jews, it's always about anti-Semitism. And now slowly, it's coming out. She's putting out these new videos mocking Jews and the way they talk. And it's just like, I don't know, is it worth it to engage with these people when like their audience is kind of set in their ways? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I mean, like, I don't do her booking. So yeah, I don't know what, you're responding to a persona and not a person necessarily. You see a lot of theater, and it's perfectly legitimate to react that way. I certainly would if I wasn't on the inside, as far as like, when we see Twitter theater and when we see social media theater, it's going to give a certain impression. But what if I told you it's just like, all right, so who else can we have on? Is there anyone else who's like Jewish but pro-Palestinian? Okay, Norman Finkelstein. Who's he? Oh, he's a professor. Okay, let's talk to him. Okay, anything else? Oh, there's this cool story about this. Okay, like a lot of this stuff is a little less thought out than you think in terms of trying to send a message or trying to be so shrewd. And my understanding is a lot of the stuff in the internet world is sort of more shooting from the hip and just being intellectually curious, but like that's a gracious way of putting it, but I think you're attributing a lot of these things. Like, we know everything about Norman Finkelstein because he's old news to us. Right. We've watched him debate Dershowitz since 2001. Right. I don't think Candace did necessarily. That's my hunch. I think she was looking, and of course he was willing to come on. I don't know if Coleman would be willing to come on. I would like to see that. Or maybe it's a waste of time because maybe it's just too theatrical and whatever. But I don't care about the tokenism. Look, everyone's like, why are you platforming her? Why are you doing that? I didn't build the platform. You could talk to other people about that. Other people built her platform, not me. You understand? And I don't have to name names here, but we all know how that came about. So don't talk to me about the fact that there's millions and millions of people now that that are responding and that she's having impact on, and they're there. So it's there. So I'm going to go and make a case. And if I don't feel like doing it, or I don't feel it's going to be constructive, I won't do it. But you can only assume someone has you on in good faith if you're actually going to go on. Otherwise, you're just performing a conversation. If you go there with an agenda or to try to see the hidden meaning behind things and not actually forget about question her, but ask real questions like what's really going on. If you notice by the end of our conversation, she said, obviously, like, Hamas is terrible, and obviously, like, Israel should do what it has to do. I'm apathetic to it because I'm not connected to the issue.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, she would never say that to anyone else necessarily. She wouldn't make that kind of concession necessarily because everyone's coming at it from an attack position and not a conversational position. And so the defense mechanisms go up. But I consider it a success and constructive for her to say something like that, which she didn't stress for long enough, which made it, I think eroded the trust with the Jewish community in a lot of ways. So for her to say that at the end of our conversation and sort of understand where I was coming from, at least in that moment, it felt constructive. What happened since then, I can't speak to. And yeah, it's disappointing to see, obviously, exposés about Holocaust stuff and Mengele and all those things. But I think a lot of that stuff is also, yeah, I mean, I don't control her editorials and her booking and who she chooses to have on. But yeah, skepticism for skepticism's sake, without critical thinking and evaluation, can lead you to some places. But we're big boys here. We're big boys and we're big girls. And we can say that's if you believe in free speech, it doesn't mean you condone by engaging, and we can call it out and we can say, yeah, that's wrong. Or that's incorrect, and here's why. We've had this conversation before. But the audience is already there, and I didn't build it. So,
you did an incredible job. It was just amazing to watch that conversation. You, as a community, we all thank you because it was needed. It was important, and it was timely. It was a very important juncture also in terms of the war and what she was going through. And you know what I mean? It was beginning with the breakup with, well, it didn't happen yet, but at that
Yeah.
time, yeah, you know, a lot was going on in her life too. It was like a critical moment, and it was a great interview.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so where it leads, what can I tell you? I don't know. It was. I certainly know what happens if you do nothing, or if you certainly silo yourself off into a corner, pat yourself on the back, give your own people who already agree with you a high five, and completely ignore it when there's someone who is possibly engageable and curious enough to hear you out. She had me on the show, uninterrupted for an hour, unedited. You know what I mean? So when those opportunities come and you can actually try to understand what's going on, for the
Out
time
of curiosity, just out of curiosity, have you had any follow-up kind of communication with her since, or that was it?
Oh, she's here. Yeah, Candace, you want to talk? Yeah, no, just Pesach, Seder, and a Fin Shavuos, but otherwise, I think I'm going there actually for Rosh Hashanah. No, I was on the show twice actually. So the first time was November, and then the second time I had a debate with another comedian, and
Yeah,
we
Dave
talked about
Smith,
Israel
yeah,
stuff.
about-
And then we had a part two of that conversation. It was all filmed at once, but I do think if I'm going to say anything, like she is sort of that like free speech absolutist, more speech. So she's like willing to talk to anybody, and sometimes to a fault where like there are certain people that just, I think in the free speech and in the response to cancel culture and wokeness, sometimes the free speech absolutism of everybody, just because somebody can say something legally means everything they say has some legitimacy, I don't think is true, or is worth listening to, I don't necessarily think is true. So there's confusion there that sometimes happens in the circles of sort of the reactionary position to the cancel culture, where you can't say anything or any joke or comment must be deemed evil or violent. On the opposite extreme of that is every single view is legitimate and must be heard out, and that's where you sort of get to that pendulum. But assessing where things are in between and how far things are going before they go down a full-on rabbit hole is sort of a personal choice. I get that people don't find it productive or engageable, and that's their prerogative. I get it. But
I think what you're doing is unbelievable, and I think that we live in a unique time where people have become like the brands, and people like influencers have a real voice. Like your next door neighbor's mother, has a 20,000 followers on Instagram, and those are the voices now you hear coming out advocating for the Jewish people, advocating for Israel. In a time where we kind of feel like we need to, where are the rabbis who are speaking for us? And why is that rabbi speaking for us who I don't feel represents me? So it's really unique to have, people like you, have such a powerful voice today. I just wanted to say that,
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, and the last thing before we get to we're going to get to the next segment, but before we get to the final segment, I just wanted to ask you what message you have for young American Jews and non-Jews during this challenging time of rising global anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Make Aliyah quick. Yeah, I mean, it's a spooky time because you never really know at what point in the history chart you're at. Like, are we at the point where the Jews were like comfortable, but things were coming in 1938 and they had to bounce and they got to leave where they're at and leave the land that you're comfortable in and go to the land that I will show you? Because this has like happened many, many times before in our history, where anti-Semitism reaches the threshold where it's time to go. Like stay and fight or time to go. Stay and fight or time to go. So post October 7th, when you're looking at a world like that, what are we to make of the UK and France and maybe down the road the United States? Obviously, you don't want to be hyperbolic and hysterical, and everything still feels like, we live in a world where social media sort of exacerbates the sense of like that reality is actually, a dangerous place for Jews, because Sam Harris was in an interview and said there was a poll of Americans recently done. If you just watch social media, within social media, you get one read on like the percentage of who supports the enemies of Israel and the anti-Semitism that's rising on Twitter. But then you poll like 70% of Americans think Israel should destroy Hamas completely and should be nothing but successful, and that for the most part, the majority of Americans support the Jewish people and support Israel. So you have sort of two different realities: the reality that exists outside of the digital world and the digital world itself, which gives you sort of a false, skewed perspective of a false read of where things are at, and everything is exaggerated. Now, at the same time, it doesn't take much in terms of a cultural shift for you can have a majority population that feels fine with the Jews, and then a small focused minority that doesn't, and things can change rather quickly if they're active enough. So you have to keep your antennas up, I think. Don't call everything anti-Semitic that isn't anti-Semitic. I think a lot of Jews on the left that through their alliances and solidarity with groups that were calling everything racist when it wasn't racist, and adjacent to that calling things anti-Semitic that weren't anti-Semitic, calling Whoopi Goldberg and Richard Spencer the same thing doesn't make any sense, and eventually it loses its cultural power. And in a sense,
well, on the flip side, it goes both ways, because they call Donald Trump a Nazi, but then when he gets shot, the former president is wishing him well. Why are you wishing Hitler well?
So I would say, as Jordan Peterson said, be precise in your speech and make sure that when you use intense labels to identify something, it better be worth the name. And so otherwise there's the cry wolf scenario where if you call everything something, we can't see anything, and we can't determine what is really a problem and what is not. If you've spent years and years, and I'm not trying to victim blame, this is only certain subsets of the Jewish community that I think have participated in that, where they use the terms too loosely. But save it for people who really deserve the term, and don't be afraid to speak out, not in a way where you shy away from these things or just shun them and pretend they don't exist. But if these things are out there and they're gaining momentum, then you got to tackle them, and you got to tackle them with courage, pride, and confidence, and not with this sort of reactionary siloing ourselves away into an echo chamber of people who only agree with us. You have to get a little uncomfortable sometimes. And in terms of rising anti-Semitism, I think the more that the Jewish individual asserts his or herself as a proud Jew, in the same way the Jewish state asserts itself as a proud Jewish state, people get upset, but they respect it. So, it's like any relationship with any between individuals. People get very resentful when you don't let them use you or you don't let them abuse you. They get upset, but that doesn't mean they don't respect it. So collectively and individually, asserting yourself and being proud and unapologetic and precise and honest and having integrity might not have everybody like you, but it will have everyone respect you.
That's a great way of putting it. And actually, just to touch on what you said about, 70%, let's say, are polled and saying that they're pro-Israel, or they want Hamas to be destroyed. But I think what is dangerous and what we're seeing is, like, through social media and through academia, they're like engineering the young generation to shift. And I think those polls show that there's actually a shift going on, at least against Israel. Like, I think it's like 50-50 right now. It was never that to that point. So that is definitely terrifying. And when we see what's happening in France and the UK, it's terrifying. And Bensi and I, we come from, the Mashhadi Persian community. And our ancestors, like a century ago, were forced converts, and they were crypto Jews for a century. They were basically outwardly Muslim, and they were keeping their Judaism in secret. And then, in 1979, during the rise of the Ayatollah, and there was a revolution in Iran, a lot of people, like you said, they thought they were comfortable there, and then all of a sudden they had to leave, they had to move, not knowing the language. So, like, I feel like history has prepared all of us to have this, like, one foot out the door readiness. But at the same time, like you said, where are we on that point? Because it's hard to know.
But your dad married an Ashki for sure. I mean, look at you. There's no way. No, you're full on.
It's a wonder. It's a wonder.
Somebody explain that to me. Are you kidding me?
Gotta find out who the milkman was. I have no idea.
What is happening? Some Eastern European dropped into Tehran. Or what? Mashhadi is different than Tehrani, right?
Well,
Well, we
there were
have a lot.
Christians, but
Actually,
yeah.
we have light skin and red hair,
I
Mashadis.
thought that was the Syrians who were the white passing
Yeah,
Sephards, but maybe I'm wrong.
they have some. We have a bunch of light skin Mashadis.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Not a lot though. You're
not a
still in
lot, but we have a decent amount. This new generation for sure.
Okay, you
Yeah.
fooled me, but yeah.
So now the last segment we want to do, just to just to end on a funny note, is to showcase your impression skills. So we want to ask you questions in the character of certain people you do impressions of. So the first one is going to be for Jordan Peterson. So Mr. Peterson, Dr. Peterson, how do you think individuals can find meaning in their lives during such chaotic times?
Ha! Well, you know, I don't really like the way the question is formulated. You know, it's like, well, you know, that's quite something, you know, because chaotic times and orderly times, you know, they exist on a fine line that exacerbates the anthropological studies of beyond human existence that leads to a spiritual realm between the dimensions of the heavens above beneath the abyss below. So to survive in that environment, man, that's going to take basically everything you got. So what else are you going to bloody do? That's what I would say.
Oh my God. It's too
That was epic. Oh my gosh.
good.
Donald Trump, what's your take on the current political climate in light of the recent attempt on your life?
Well, you know, I don't believe in climate change except for one thing. The climate's going to change politically because they love me. They love me so much. You know, in 2024, we're going to have a political climate change that's going to come in so strongly. You know that, right? Because they love me, these people. They love me. They tried to take my ear off, but that's okay. I grew it back. You know, I can regenerate like a lizard. Even though the Democrats are the lizard people. Gavin Newsom, he's a lizard. It's weird. He's weird. He's a lizard person. So is Kamala. She talks weird. She talks in rhyme. You know that, right? She talks in rhyme like a poetry teacher. It's terrible. And we're going to come in strongly with a huge climate change like you've never seen, but not the kind of climate, a political climate change, but we're going to unleash American energy. We're going to unleash it so strongly, and we're going to clean up this border. The border is terrible. They're going to destroy this country. If she wins, if you're a Jewish person and you vote for Kamala, or Biden or any of these people, you should have your head examined because they don't care about you. She doesn't care about her husband. She beats him every night with a stick. Nobody knows this. But Doug, what is it? Amoff? What's his name? Well, he's a beta male, they call him, a beta male. She beats him every night with a little stick. I know this because I've heard from so many people. We all know this. So that's what's going to happen. We're going to have a political climate change, not the real climate change nonsense the Democrats are talking about.
Oh my gosh.
I need to breathe now.
That was amazing.
So, Douglas Murray, how do you perceive the cultural shifts occurring in the West, especially on college campuses?
Well, I don't really speak publicly about it, but so many people understand what's going on here that on the universities it should come as no shock or surprise that the fall of the West rests at the hands of these preposterous administrators that have been poisoning the minds of young people for generations. And I, for one, am getting sick and tired of it. The public is very sick and tired of it as well. So I think that we're not really coming on to it, and it's not going to continue as long as the West sees rotten decay and moral depravity. It's very strange indeed. I don't understand why, yes, tell me why these faculty who wear nothing but short-sleeved button-down shirts with unkempt hair think they can educate an entire population that's going to be completely ill-kempt and unwell. I'm tired of this ilk of these people who think they can run society for us like philosopher kings. I, for one, resent it, and I think most people in the West resent it as well.
That is unbelievable. Wow. Oh my gosh. All right. Rabbi David Bashevskin, former guest on our show as well. What is the biggest challenge facing yeshiva bachers today?
Well, the thing is, dealing with Jewish particularities and all of the things that the Bacharim are dealing with, I find that
if you're going to hone in on the particular issue and you're talking about the Shabtai Tzvi in particular, and the Messianic era in which people are striving to find a way to, these Bacharim are doing nothing but pounding cholent every single day. They're gaining weight like crazy. There's a shidduch crisis because they don't understand the difference in social dynamics between friendships and relationships, intimacy, sexuality, particularity, unisicality, messianic, rabbinic. There's all sorts of myriad of issues, and I think tackling that together as a community, both at an institutional and communal level, is where we're going to find common ground.
Oh gosh. Oh.
That was good. Okay.
Oh.
Last
Started off a little wonky, but I found my way.
Oh no, you found it. That was
amazing.
probably the best one.
Yeah.
Okay, so label wiener of mislabeled. Who makes better food, Ashkenazim or Sephardim?
Well, a lot of people think Sephardim makes so much food, but I don't really like it. It's too spicy. I mean, if there's so much spices, I like a Vildavish. I like John. Like, show me a Sephardic peer. You can compare Sephardic food and Ashkenazi food. I would take Ashkenazi food every day, all day. Anytime, anywhere. If you can't make a good cholent, then you're not like a real Jew. Sorry.
All right, and last one, Prince Harry. How do you think public figures can use humor to bridge cultural and societal divides?
Well, I would say that humor can be very hurtful, so you have to be careful, especially between various cultures. You know, Em and I live in a multicultural household, and any kind of jokes related to my family can be very hurtful. So we need to stop joking and take it very seriously, because unconscious bias is there in every single joke that I hear, and it's very hurtful. And I love my brother and I love my family, but it's hurtful.
Oh God, it's so good. You know what I love about your impressions? And I appreciate certain impressionists who they don't do the exact impression, but they find something in the impression and they kind of like exaggerate it a little bit. Like
Sure.
I think like Will Sasso, for example, he's like an obscure kind of comedian, but he does these amazing impressions that they're like so exaggerated, but they're funnier because he found something in the impression that like no one else found. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? So I feel like you have that, which is really amazing. And before we go, if you could just tell our audience where they can find you.
Yeah, I love Will Sasso too. His Jesse Ventura is incredible. You know, I used to live in the Banjai where I would do, he's great. I had 5 dogs and 67 cats. Do you know about the Gulf of Tonkin? His is better than mine. You can find me at AJ-Comedy on Instagram, AJ-Comedy on TikTok. Also, Ami Kozak Official, names are synonymous. AJ-Comedy or Ami Kozak Official on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Ami Kozak. My podcast is called Ami's House, the Ami's House Pod, Ami's House on YouTube, and my band is called Distant Cousins. Distant Cousins Official on Instagram. We're releasing an album actually in August. We'll be on tour with Matisiao at the end of the summer, so stay tuned for that. And more stand-up shows coming up this summer and throughout into the fall. Follow on social media for all of your updates.
Ami, thank you for bringing joy to people. Thank you for standing up for our people. Thank you for coming on to our humble pod. We appreciate everything and just keep growing, keep going, keep growing.
Amen. Thanks, boys.
Thank you so much. Kol Tuv.